Hello YouTube, hello YTPC, Full Smoking Bar here, and I want to talk about how to care for your tobacco today a little bit. And a question I see all the time is, how do I know if my tobacco has gone bad? So I want to make a video about it. Now the short answer is tobacco doesn't ever go bad. Sort of. There's a much longer answer, and we're going to get into that. If tobacco molds, it will go bad. So you don't want it to mold. If a tobacco doesn't mold, it can last pretty much indefinitely. Now, we're going to back up a little bit, and we're going to talk about what you do with your tobacco. So the tobacco will come in some sort of a container, a tin or one of these kind of little containers or whatever. Then I have a video on tobacco storage that you can go back and watch that talks about what to do once you've opened the tin. Okay, now in my experience, the vast majority of tobacco, especially flakes, come out too wet. So I dry my tobacco. And I will lay flakes out on a paper towel like this, and I will let them dry out until they get to where I like them, and then I put them in a jar, kind of like that. And again, I went over that in another video. Okay, the longer you leave these out, the drier they will become. Okay, now, if you lay a tobacco out like this ribbon cut here and spread it all out like this, it's going to dry more quickly than if you leave it clumped up like that. Makes sense. Okay. Now, what happens if you open a tin like this and you leave the tobacco in it and then you forget about it and you go back and you realize that it has gotten too dry? It's crunchy and it's too dry. If it's just a little bit too dry, what I like to do is take one of these little packs like this, and I get the little bit lower ones. You can get these all the way up to, I think, like 74% humidity, which is more for cigars. This is really pretty much for cigars too. These tend to be too humid for pipe tobacco long term. But what you can do is you can put this in here and close the lid and leave it for, a few days. Take it out, shake it up, check the tobacco. If it's good, great. If not, if it's still too dry, put it back in after you've shaken it up and let it go for a little, few more days. And just keep checking it. And once it gets rehumidified, then you just take this out and you put the lid back on and you put it away, and then you're good to go. Okay? Now, if you open it up and it's too moist, spread it out on a piece of paper like this and let it dry. And you can go back and forth and really not hurt anything unless you get it too moist for too long and it molds. That's the one killer, is mold. Okay, what do you do if you've got really dry tobacco? Well, what I do if I dig in the cellar and realize I've got one that's gotten way too dried out, is I will use one of these kind of things here. Like if you have a small amount, you can use this, and a little bit, and if you have quite a bit, you can put it in a big one. And I just put it over boiling water, not in the water, but just put it over the steam and stir the tobacco up, and eventually it will rehydrate it. And it'll do it pretty quick. Once you do that, you probably want to let that sit out for a bit to make sure you didn't get it too moist, because it can mold. So, a little bit of hydration, use one of these. A lot of hydration, you can put it over steam. And that's pretty much it. And the last thing I want to talk about is if the tobacco has been stored for a while and it could be too moist, and you open it up and you think you have mold in it. It can be mold, or it can be plume. Plume is just the oil in the tobacco that has kind of crystallized, and there's a few ways to tell a difference. Now, if you're not sure, take it to a tobacconist and have them look at it, or ask questions online. Make sure it's not mold, because you don't want to smoke mold. That is potentially very harmful. But a couple of things you can do. If you shine a light across the spots and it is sparkly, it's probably not mold. If you can scratch it off with your thumb and it turns into a fine white powder and doesn't leave any marks on the tobacco, again, it's probably not mold. If it is kind of gray or green in color and furry and smells bad, that's the key, the smell. You can smell it. That is probably mold. So you can do a few things to rule out whether or not it's mold. If you're not sure, again, take it to somebody that's an expert and knows. Don't ever smoke mold. But that's about it. Kind of to go back over it, I like to dry my tobacco. I dry tobacco flakes on a towel. Ribbon cut or cube cut, I will dry on a piece of paper like this. If I want it to dry fast, I'll spread it out. This will dry more slowly. You can slowly dry things in the tin. You can just open this and leave it in here, and over time it will dry, but it will be a lot more slow than if you leave it out in the air. Okay. If you need to rehydrate, you can use one of these for a few days. If you need to rehydrate more aggressively, you can put it in a sieve and you can put it over steam. But again, you got to be mindful that you can get it too wet and you'll need to let it dry. You don't ever want to store tobacco that's too wet. That's how you get mold. Tobacco growers will tell you that they are constantly fighting mold when they're trying to dry green tobacco and make it into a smokable form. They fight mold a lot, and a lot of the big tobacconists will add preservatives to the tobacco leaf to try to prevent mold growth. But proper moisture content's very important in preventing mold. Okay. Anyway, as far as how long does tobacco last? Again, it lasts pretty much forever. I have a friend who was cleaning out a closet, and on the top shelf in the closet he found a plug of tobacco in a Ziploc bag, kind of like this, just a plug in a Ziploc baggie. And once he got to thinking about it, he realized that plug had been up there in that baggie for about 20 years. And it was really dried out, and it was really hard, and he actually steamed it and eventually got it pulled apart and cut into flakes and whatnot, and got it rehydrated properly, and it smoked wonderfully, and it was perfectly fine. But that was a case where it had sat there for 20 years and just dried out, and there was no mold present. It was very dry. But he rehydrated it, and it was perfect. Now, if that had set up there in some other kind of container and had grown, and was too wet when it was stored and grew mold in it, it would have been bad. And that's really the only way that it goes bad, is if it gets moldy, and that's, what you want to look out for. So that's pretty much it. When you open your tobacco, most of it needs to be dried. Some of it's perfect. You want to store it in a jar once it's at the right moisture content, and it'll last pretty much forever. If you forget about it and leave it in something like this that's opened and it dries out too much, you can always rehydrate it. But that's it. And then you definitely want to educate yourself over the difference between plume on a tobacco and mold on a tobacco. And again, if you're not sure, go ask somebody that knows. Ask an expert. Go to your local tobacconist, research online, use all of the resources you have at your disposal, and don't ever smoke mold. All right, that's it for this video. I want to thank everybody for watching. I hope this was helpful for some of you folks that aren't sure about these things. Hopefully you'll like, comment, subscribe. If you don't, that's fine too. And I hope everybody has a pleasant day and happy smokes, and take care of yourself and all that stuff.